Braden Kelley is founder of Business Strategy Innovation and has been advising companies, including Microsoft, Wonderman, and HomeAway.com, on how to increase their revenues and cut their costs since 1996. He's a thought leader on the topics of continuous innovation and works with clients to create innovative strategies, effective customer marketing, organizational change, and improved organizational performance. Perhaps just as interestingly, Braden has developed his business and his expertise in a really collective, meshy fashion, using online tools like Twitter and blogs. I believe his blog is the #1, or his website is the #1 online resource talking about innovation. So he's really developed a community in a very meshy way talking about these subjects. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Braden, who's going to be sharing with us about our innovation bonfire.
Great. Well, thank you, Jonathan, and thank you all for coming back from lunch. I'll just go ahead and jump right in and tell you just a couple quick things. Number one, thank you for hosting me here in La Jolla, and I feel very fortunate to spend not only really just the next 45 minutes, but also another 45 minutes after that, where we'll be having more of a table discussion type format. The first 45 minutes will be me talking with a little bit of interactivity. The second 45 will be a lot of interactivity with very little of me talking. And I hope that during the next 45 minutes to an hour and a half that you find at least one or two useful ideas from the subject matter that I'll be presenting. So as you heard Jonathan mention, I'm the author of a book called Stoking Your Innovation Bonfire from John Wiley & Sons. There's a small little startup in Redmond that just acquired 240 copies of this to help encourage a creation of a common language of innovation. Also a chapter in a guide to open innovation and crowdsourcing I wrote as well. I've lived and worked in England, Germany, and the United States. But of course now I live in Seattle. It's buried under snow and ice. And on Twitter, over 12,000 people follow me. And I'm probably best known for the book and also for the site that I've created called innovationexcellence.com, which has nearly 4,000 articles from over 150 contributing authors on the business aspects of innovation and things that touch on innovation. So intellectual property, design, creativity, the cultural aspects of innovation, the process aspects, and it's growing by 3 or 4 articles every day, and we're always looking for new, interesting content from corporate contributors, and then also we have a lot of great content from thought leaders and consultants on the topic as well. I am not an architect, but I am a social business architect, which means that I work with organizations to help them create stronger connections with their customers, with their employees, and with their partners and other people that they deal with in their organization through the use of digital media, the internet, email, social media, those kinds of things. I'm definitely also not a surfer, so you won't see me out there. I am here, however, to talk about Stoking Your Innovation Bonfire and really what it takes to really identify and remove barriers to innovation and really hopefully give you some interesting things to think about and to consider as you try to embed innovation, hopefully, more deeply into your organizations as you seek to create a culture of innovation excellence. So it's always good to start by clearing your mind and taking breaths and especially after lunch, making some room for a snack later on. But I have to warn you ahead of time that we will have some interactive components, so don't get too comfortable. First question, are you ready to innovate? Are you ready to unleash the innovation superpowers that you have within yourself and within your organization? Are you ready to fight through some of the necessary blows that you may suffer as you try to innovate and some of the flesh wounds that you may encounter as people fight against the new ideas that you may try to embed and grow within your organization? And as we look at innovation and we look at what it's like to innovate, one of the things that I like to highlight is that if you look at the word innovator and invader, they sound very similar. And people within the organization often fight to protect the status quo. And so innovation is often seen as an invader by the status quo within the organization. And so you may suffer some slings and arrows as you present new ideas and try to embed them within your firms. But it's a worthy fight. And so it requires you to have a lot of flexibility, a lot of strength, and a lot of focus to try to make innovation happen within your organization. And there's a couple of necessary tensions that we see within organizations as they try to remain innovative or reestablish their innovation heritage. And one tension is the tension between exploitation and exploration. So exploitation is really maximizing the resources that you have, the knowledge and the products and services that you offer now. And exploration is trying to find the next source of growth and the next opportunities for the organization. And the skills that are required to do one are not necessarily the skills that are optimal for the other. And sort of in the same way, you have this tension between the executive mindset and the entrepreneurial mindset. So if you look at the executive mindset, they're really focused on making the trains run on time and trying to avoid failure. Where for the entrepreneur, they're really focused on, how can I create success? If you think about a lot of entrepreneurs, they're maxing out their credit cards, they're taking out a second mortgage on their house because they really believe in their idea. And for them, failure is not really an option. That's not something that they spend time thinking about. But the executive does spend time thinking about how to avoid failure, how to avoid, screwing it up and losing their job because they destroyed the golden goose of the organization. And in the book, one of the main framework or the main way of thinking about innovation throughout the book is how do we identify and remove barriers to innovation? And we look at 10 different areas within the book. There's vision, strategy, goals, insights, idea generation, evaluation and development, and then organizational psychology barriers, information and structural barriers, and sustainability. And we don't have enough time to go into each in a lot of detail, but if we look at vision, strategy, and goals real quickly in the intersection that we have there, we have, what are we focusing our innovation efforts on? Why are we pursuing innovation? When we look at the vision aspect, then we move to strategy. What are we doing to try and realize our vision and who is expected to participate? And then the goal is making it a little bit more tangible. How specifically are we trying to execute on our innovation strategy and vision? And often, how are we trying to measure what we're trying to achieve with innovation? So let's go a little bit deeper. Let's get into a little more detail, and let's jump right into an exercise that I like to do at the beginning to get people thinking, and that's an exercise in perspective. So I'm going to show you something, and then I want you to write down what you see. So, okay, here it comes. Okay, quick, write down what you saw in this picture. And then who wants to volunteer what they saw? Pair of blue jeans.
Face in the waistband.
Face in the waistband. Okay.
Naked man running around.
Naked man running around. Okay. Because he's missing his blue jeans. Okay. Experience. Okay, so you saw a lot of different things. Did anybody see the old people or the Coke bottle? Well, it's not that kind of exercise, but you can see that different people saw different things, even though there's only one object here. We're only looking at one object. And if we take it a little bit further and we pose another question, how would you create a green pair of blue jeans? Hemp. Just yell out your answers. That's fine. Recycle them. Reused.
Colored dye.
Colored dye. Okay.
Make them real expensive.
Make them real expensive. Okay. True cost of goods. So usually I get lots of different answers. That's good. I mean, everybody has a different perspective on this question, and that's one of the things that we really have to be careful as we approach innovation is what question are we asking and how are we asking it? Because depending on how we ask the question will determine the kinds of answers that we get. So oftentimes the most important thing, the most critical thing to any innovation attempt is how you frame the challenge, how you frame what you're trying to ask people to do. And so if we look at again, another question, which is, what is the biggest impact on the planet of this product?
Everybody wears them because it's getting boring.
Everybody wears them, so life is getting boring. Okay.
Lots of cowboy heartthrobs.
Lots of cowboy heartthrobs.
The washing.
The washing.
Recycle.
recycling them is a big impact?
Manufacturing.
Manufacturing?
Casual Friday.
Casual Friday, the evil Casual Friday has been the biggest impact. So the biggest impact of this product on the planet is actually the usage of water, the water that we use to wash them. Does anybody know why people wash their jeans, what the number one reason for washing jeans is? Okay, we've got shrinking, we've got fading. I noticed nobody mentioned because they're dirty. And that's not the number one reason, amazingly enough, is that people wash them to shrink them and make them fit snugly again. And so here we are wasting all this water and putting all these, chemicals and detergents and things into our water system just to make them fit more snugly again. So when we look at green and making a pair of jeans green, there's lots of different ways that we could go about solving the problem. There's trying to make the manufacturing process greener, or how we grow cotton. Can we use less water in growing the cotton, or can we make them not get dirty and not smell? Can we make them not get baggy and so that they always fit snugly? There's lots of different ways that we could solve that problem of greening the blue jeans experience, if you want to call it that. And if we take that a step further and we look at other things that organizations are doing to attack the sustainability problem, you have Coca-Cola. They generally have a distributed bottling and distribution process. They don't necessarily bottle everything in Atlanta and ship it all over the country. Generally, they distribute their bottling. You have Method, and lots of the laundry detergents and other soap products have taken water out of the product, so they're not shipping as much water around the country. Things are more concentrated. And then we have water bottles. More and more bottles are either being made of plants, fibers, or using less plastic. The plastic's thinner, and so less plastic is needing to be recycled. So there's lots of different ways. If you say, hey, we want to make our product more sustainable, that you can answer that question and that you can solve for that problem. And as we look at definitions and really trying to solve, how we think about innovation, the way that I define innovation is that innovation transforms the useful seeds of invention into solutions valued above every existing alternative, and then, of course, makes them widely adopted. And I like to draw this distinction between invention and innovation because I see them as two separate things. Innovation really requires adoption, and it requires also that it delivers enough value to displace existing solutions, even if the existing solution that you're displacing is the do-nothing solution, which is very popular in many areas where people say, oh, but nobody's doing this before. So let's look a little bit more about value. And value, in my mind, is one of the keys to success, both in innovation and in business. And when you look at other definitions of innovation, some like to talk about idea plus execution, or even if you add insight into the mix, I still don't think it captures it all. And so I like to talk about innovation as three components being characterized by value creation, value access, and value translation. And so value creation is really about making things more efficient, making things more effective, making things possible that weren't possible before, or achieving psychological or emotional benefits that weren't there before. There's lots of different ways to create value, and these are some of the ones that I like to talk about. But in addition to value creation, value access is very important. You can also think about value access as friction reduction, or removing friction from the ability for people to access the value that you've created. And that's an area where often design comes into big play. Is if you think about something like the iPod, one of the great things was that there were other hard disk-based music players, and there were other music players before the iPod, but the design allowed people to access that many, thousands of songs in a way that no other device had made it possible and even really usable before. So people are able to access the value of being able to have thousands of songs in their pocket. And then we have value translation, which is really the ability about, how do you help people understand the value that you've created and see why they want to adopt it. You can have the world's greatest gadget or whiz-bang thing, something like the Segway, but if you do a really terrible job of translating the value for people, then they don't understand how it fits into their life and they'll never adopt it. And as you look also at value translation, I like to talk about it as a continuum between the incremental innovations, which are the small innovations, where you may be able to get away with explaining how the new thing is different, versus on the disruptive side, something like the Segway, where there's a great deal of education that has to be done to really make that product or service adoptable on a wide scale. So Segway, if they had done a better job about educating the governments and people about how, yes, it would be safe if this device is on the sidewalks, and yes, you should change your laws to allow it to be on the sidewalks and things like that, they might have had a much better chance. And education, the more disruptive something is, the harder it will be for people to understand it and see how it fits into their life, and the more education you might have to do even before you launch the product. So let's look at an example of value translation, both good and bad. So up here I have a tagline for a product at its launch. Our most advanced technology and a magical and revolutionary device at an unbelievable price. Can anybody name what product that was a launch statement for? Any guesses? Just yell it out. So this was the iPad. And Apple launched this with this big fanfare, and they launched it with this, statement out on the stage, and they got killed in the press. People said it's a giant iPhone and much worse things. And it did terrible at, in the first few months after launch. But then, 3 months later, by the time they started shipping the product, they started to have these out-of-home advertisements all around places like New York and other places. And suddenly, people started to understand, much better than the previous one, how it would fit into their life. And so oftentimes, failure can turn into success just by finding the right way of translating the value for people and helping them see how it can fit into their lives and why it should displace the solution that they're using in an existing area of their life. And so when you combine these three things, value creation, value access, and value translation, they're multiplicative in the way that they interact. If you do one good and you do one really poorly, you can still have a negative outcome. But generally, to have success, you need to do all three well. So let's dig in a little deeper and look at, if we pursue the castle motif and we look at, how can the invaders win? Catapults can come in quite handy, or trebuchets. This is probably actually a trebuchet. So what we know about catapults is that they accelerate things, that risk is involved, you need a system to operate them, you need people to run it, it's not a one-man show. You can't do it all yourself as a result, and barriers can be overcome with them. So if we look at acceleration, one of the key things to acceleration and innovation is that through the way that you ask the questions and the way that you form your language of innovation within your organization, it allows you to hopefully accumulate energy and then unleash it in a focused direction. And as you get your innovation culture and process right, and you start to systematize innovation, and you start to show that you are innovative in the area that you're trying to own, then it starts to give you permission to go outside your core area, and it gives you the competitive advantage to project your innovation superpower, farther out beyond your borders. In the way that Apple went from computers into music devices and into phones, because they've mastered what they were doing in their home space first before they started to move out. And as you also look at acceleration, passion can be very important and can be very contagious in trying to rally support for an idea. But at the same time, it's good to keep it a little bit close to the vest initially, because every idea has a fatal flaw. And the key is to try to find the fatal flaw internally on your small team that really cares about the idea and is really passionate about it before you start showing it to the people that are just going to naturally be skeptics, or before you start really going to funding. Because if you have the answer for how you're going to overcome the fatal flaw when you go to try to get funding for your idea, or you go to try to get resources to staff up to implement your idea, you're going to have a much greater chance of success in moving it forward. So the second point, if we look at risk, some of the risks that are involved in innovation, you can have the wrong insight. You can focus on video quality versus making it cheaper and more available. You can overestimate the new value. This mousetrap that we know and love and have been using for 100 years, is still the most popular mousetrap, even though hundreds and thousands of patents are filed every single year for new mousetrap designs. You can underestimate the development costs. The GM EV1, too expensive, failed miserably, short range, all those things. Chevy Volt, within the first five months of its introduction, it sold more than twice what the EV1 did in its entire sales life cycle. You can be too early. So this is the Seihan MP3 Man, which is the first hard disk-based MP3 player. It was invented by Compaq. Compaq decided not to produce it, so they licensed the technology out, and in 1998 this came out. But as you can see, not with a way that allows you to access thousands of songs, unless you like to push buttons a lot. Or you can also be too early. If we look at the tablet computing environment, this is the tablet PC, which came out 8 or 9 years before the iPad came out. And you can also be overconfident. You can think that you've created the best thing ever and ignore some of the key aspects of things like value translation and value access and make it so that people can't extract the value or understand the value that you think is obvious, but to other people may not be. And so to start making things really happen and happen in a sustainable way, you need to have a system and a systematized approach to innovation. And the first step, of course, is to really try to understand where you are. Where are you on the innovation continuum of your maturity? Are you over here on the left where it's just always reactive and you don't really have a formal approach? Or is it all the way over on the right where not only do you have a very formal approach to innovation, but you're trying to innovate your innovative process? And if we look at the system, there's a lot of different moving parts that you want to have together. And you can see there's everything from corporate strategy and innovation vision strategy and goals to insight generation, idea collaboration, having a portfolio of ideas that you're managing in innovation projects, because they may not all be successful. I mean, hopefully they will be, but you have to manage against different risk profiles and time horizons to make sure that you always have innovation coming out to the market. And as we look out, also there's funding and metrics, and then trying to make your innovation process even better over time. And then there's also looking at, well, how do we go about creating our insights? How do we really understand what the customer is looking for? Often that involves turning data into information, and information into knowledge, and knowledge into insights, and incorporating trend information, and doing research, and getting feedback from customers, and all these things. And insights really help to drive good ideas that then make your innovation happen. And the innovation, of course, won't happen without a team of people managing your system of innovation and keeping it in good working order. You need to have people that are always out scouting for new ideas and new opportunities for the firm. People that are really good at working together as a team. People that are willing to fight for their ideas and find those fatal flaws and kill them. And then, of course, people that understand the role that they have to play in innovation. Because there are lots of different roles, and we'll talk about this in the next section. One of the things in the book in Chapter 5 is the 9 innovation roles, and it really looks at all the different ways that people can participate in the innovation process and the different roles that people naturally fill to make successful innovation happen. Because, of course, you can't do it all yourself. When you look at creating innovation, innovation is all about change, and then it causes change for lots of different parts of the organization, whether that's human resources or finance or marketing. If you think back to the iPod when Apple was getting ready to launch that, they didn't know anything about music, so they had to figure out the whole music industry, and they had to figure out how they're going to protect the content when they put it up, and how they were going to sell the content online. And all these things they had to learn and build capabilities for because they had this device that they wanted to bring to market. But it's not all, at the same time, you have to balance the internal change that's going to happen because of your innovation with the external change that you're going to pose on the ecosystem around you. Your distribution channels, your customers, your competitors, your suppliers. It's a balancing act of how an innovation is going to interact with the change internally and the change externally that it's going to create. But if you do it well, of course, barriers can be overcome. And these again are the 10 barriers that we look at in the book. And one of the things that I did as part of the book was I asked the question of, what is your number one barrier to entry. And so you can see here the options were absence of an innovation strategy, organizational psychology, structure, information sharing, level of trust and respect, and the overwhelming top choice was organizational psychology. And if we look at that, most employees are not necessarily fully engaged in their work. They don't feel that they're respected or trusted, or a lot of other things happen. And so I created this innovators framework that takes an idea that Gary Hamel came up with and layers an additional level of complexity on it. And Gary talks about how when people just show up to work, generally you're going to get their intellect, diligence, and obedience just from fear, greed, management, and leadership. But if you want to get their initiative, you have to start treating them with respect. And if you want to start getting their creativity, there has to be a certain level of feeling of trust within the organization that when they share their ideas that they're not going to be ridiculed for them. And then to unlock passion, oftentimes you have to inject a sense of fun and purpose within the organization. But to get to innovation, then you have to also layer on access to insights and also the resource flexibility to move the finance and the people to the projects that you want to really push forward and make happen. And so there's another tension to think about if you consider going outside and working with other organizations and possibly in an open innovation or a crowdsourcing type approach to make things happen. And that's the tension that P&G talks about of the transition that they had to make from not invented here to proudly found elsewhere. And that can be, of course, a difficult thing to make because in a science-based organization or a creativity-based organization, people like to feel that that's their job to solve the problems. And when you start having other people help to solve the problems, then you can have this not invented here type resistance to integrating those ideas from outside back into the organization. And so P&G has been on more than a 10-year journey to try to make this switch. And now they achieve, over 50% of their new products come from ideas from outside the organization. But one thing that I must stress is if you look at the emerging science of innovation management, it's really not all new. It's a collection of all these sciences that we already know something about and that we need to remember that we know these things about. So knowledge management, collaboration, managing change, human resources, all these things sort of come together to create the proper environment for successful innovation and the innovation culture that you may want to create to make innovation sustainable. So when you start bringing these things together and you've got your catapult at the ready, then you're ready to attack internal barriers, leverage external talent, unleash your internal talent, continue to optimize your system, manage the risks, and then also, of course, accelerate your effort. But one of the things I really like to talk about is that often, big ideas start small. It's not all about the big idea. And oftentimes the big idea is a collection of small ideas that people integrate together and learn things from in order to make the idea grow bigger. So when you look at ideas are kind of like seeds, and you don't really know up front, which one of them is going to grow into the whopper, which one of them is truly going to be the big idea. And that's another reason why it's important to have a portfolio of innovation projects that you're pursuing. So if we look at a couple examples, this one's from Hugh MacLeod of gapingvoid.com, which is a fun business-related comic strip. He tells a story about how when he was working for an advertising agency, a customer brought them a brief for launching a new detergent. And so everybody in the agency was saying, oh, we'll do this big TV campaign to support it. And he said, well, what if we use those little cards that you find back by the restroom in bars and restaurants and things like that to test different concepts and see what people react to. And then maybe after we know what people are going to react to, what really resonates with people, then maybe we can do a big TV campaign. So, the reason I like to talk about this example is because, how can you think in your own world about how you can experiment and test what's going to really resonate before you start spending a lot of money to try to really push it to customers or clients. Another good example is from Monrovia Nursery. A very simple example, if we look at plants, you go to the nursery, you go to the Home Depot, and you get these plants in the little black plastic containers. Well, apparently the process of putting the plant in the black plastic thing is called canning, and apparently it's also very a dirty process and potentially even unhealthy for workers if they're packing wet dirt into the can because it can get under their nails, they can get infected, and other things that can happen. So one of the workers that's doing this dirty job suggested that, well, why don't we because it's worse when the dirt's wet than when it's dry. Why don't we cover the dirt when it rains so the dirt stays dry? Pretty simple idea. Well, what they discovered as an unexpected side effect from doing this is that, well, it turns out that yields in wet soil are as low as 60%, which means that you lose 40% of the plants, they die and whatever, before a customer actually buys them and gets them home. So when you start multiplying that effect for this one particular nursery times 2,700 plants per hour, you can start to see that if you raise the yield just from this simple idea of covering the dirt when it rains, suddenly they're starting to have a lot less waste in their process and making a lot more money. And if we look at some of the customer experience innovations that have happened over the last decade, we have Umpqua Bank that redesigned the way that the banking experience is to be more like a Starbucks, comfortable place. Now, I don't know if this is actually a real product, but when we talked about psychological benefits, wouldn't it be nice if you could see your toast actually get brown and know you're not going to burn it? The one thing the design doesn't seem to account for is how you get it out, but maybe it comes with a stick or something so you don't burn yourself getting it out. Also, people generally like to have 2 pieces of toast. This only seems to toast 1 at a time. You need to buy 2, or you make it twice as wide so you can fit 2 in. Copenhagen, Denmark, very bike-friendly city. They've built these little railings and places to put your feet so that when you pull up to the stoplight, you're not stepping in the snow and the slush. Helps to encourage people to ride their bicycles. Volkswagen did a campaign where they installed a piano on the stairs, and there's a video that goes along with this too, but what you see throughout the day is that nobody's taking the escalator, everybody's taking the piano stairs. And you start combining these little ideas in a country with socialized medicine, which we have too, then you start to see these little ideas can start to have a real big financial impact and an increase in the overall social good and health. So another thing to consider is that as you start to look at innovation and opportunities for innovation, there's another tension of looking at the tension between what's needed and what's possible. And oftentimes the information on what's needed, you can try to uncover from your suppliers and your customers, and what's possible from your suppliers and partners and people that you use for floorings and construction materials and other things. And then another story I really like to tell is the story about Bombardier, the aircraft manufacturer. I heard these guys speak from Bombardier one time, and they told this story about how they started their innovation project within their organization, had an idea management system that they were using. They were getting ready, so they'd already run a couple challenges where they put out requests for employees for ideas around a particular question. And this one guy had submitted some great ideas, and so they were getting ready to post another challenge. So they went by this guy's desk, and they said, "Hey, Philippe," or whatever his name was, we're getting ready to start this other challenge. And he says, "Oh, really?" And he reaches under his desk, and he pulls out this little black book, and they say, "Oh, what's that?" And he said, well, every time I have an idea, I write it down in my little black book. And so what's the challenge about? And so he's got all these ideas that he wants to share. So then I started to think, well, what would the power be in your organization if everybody had a little black book of innovation? If everybody was capturing the ideas that they had when they had them, and then later when it's relevant and you actually have time and energy and resources to focus on a particular question, that people might be able to access those ideas and put them to good use. And as you think about putting ideas to good use, and you start thinking about how can we adapt ideas from other industries, another example of looking outside your own industry and how inspiration can come from outside is that a tire company was looking for a new method for cutting rubber. And they were looking at, well, we could spend a bunch of money on R&D and have our guys try to figure out how to fix it, or we can start looking and seeing if anybody solved this problem. And so they started looking around and they started looking in adjacent industries, and sure enough, they found a technology for cutting cheese that was applicable to cutting rubber. Turns out cheese and rubber are both viscous materials. I'm not a scientist, but oftentimes the solution for your problem may already exist, but you may have to look outside your normal way of places that you look, your normal industry, to see what other adjacent or similar industries a solution might exist in. So, looking outside architectural design firms to management consulting firms or other kinds of service firms, are there other kinds of service firms that have solved the particular challenge that you're having? And then one final little quick example is in a big box warehouse, electronics, home goods kind of store, they were having a lot of returns from refrigerators being damaged. And so this one sales guy said, well, what if we measured the refrigerator and cut a piece of string for the key dimensions and stapled it to the receipt and gave it to the customer, and they could go home and measure their door and the space where they're putting it with these pieces of string before the refrigerator shows up. And so they started doing that, and sure enough, they started to have a lot fewer damaged refrigerators coming back, and they started having a lot fewer returns. And so it was a huge win for the organization. And it sounds like a real feel-good story, but there's another part to the story, and that's the fact that this chain of stores had 2,000 locations, and that they had no way to share this success story from that one store to the other 1,999 stores. So more than 99% of the potential benefit of this really simple but effective idea was lost because there was no way to communicate this great idea that somebody had had and the power that this simple idea had. Okay, time to get you back involved again. So anybody tell me what these two guys are looking at and what example we're about to talk about? Sticky note, Post-it note. Yes, so that's what they're looking at. So we have 3 dates on the bottom, 1970, 74, and 80. Can anybody tell me which year the Post-it note was launched?
Launched as a Post-it note?
Launched as a Post-it note.
I'll go with 80.
So we got 80,
74.
74. Okay, so here's the chronology. So 1970, the adhesive was invented. That wasn't very good adhesive, so it just sat around. 74 is the famous story of when the guy was going to church and was using it to keep his placeholders from falling out of his hymnal. It wasn't until 1980 that after he started talking about the application that he had found for it, that it was launched as a product. So even though the thing became this huge success and something that we use every day, you can see that sometimes a great idea takes time to reach maturity and actually reach the market. So invention, application, innovation, 3 different things. And then final thing real quick, whitening toothpaste. This is back to the psychological benefits because whitening toothpaste doesn't technically whiten your teeth. It removes stains, and the standard what they found is really a loophole in the law that states that in order for something to be claimed as whitening, it just has to be effective at removing stains. And so now every toothpaste that you see is a whitening toothpaste. You can't hardly find one that's not. But if you actually want whiter teeth, other than just having your stains removed, you have to buy a different kind of product. Toothpaste won't do it for you. And so if you look at the little ideas becoming big ideas, it starts to become an idea around, how do you create an army of eyes within your organization, and how do you harness that army of eyes for the productive growth of your organization, and do it in a way that doesn't disenfranchise people, that you have the resources available to staff projects, to take up good ideas, both in terms of people, finances, and other resources. But people are out there wanting to be engaged. The key is to have the ability to help them make their ideas happen. So we're almost done. If you'd like to get innovation insights in your inbox every week, we have a newsletter with over 5,500 subscribers, or we also have an RSS feed that you're more than perfectly free to embed it in your corporate portals or whatever else. And I have one final concept that I want to share at this particular part of the segment, and that's everybody talks about Apple. Apple is probably the most popular innovation topic example that people use. But the thing that I want to say here is that there's a lot of things that we'll go into real fast about Apple here, and that I want to say forget about failing fast, focus on learning fast. So instrument your projects for learning, instrument your projects for rapid adaptation, rapid learning and rapid adaptation. If we look at Apple and the iPod, it took 3 years from the time the iPod launched until the Windows version of iTunes was released. So the launch is over here in 2001, so it's off the chart. And it wasn't until the Windows version started to be available that things really started to take off. If we look at the phone category, it was 2 years after Apple launched the Motorola Rocker, which failed miserably, that they launched the iPhone. It was 1 year after they launched the iPhone until they launched the App Store. And it was 3 months from the time that they announced the iPad to finding the secret sauce of having the billboards that really showed people how it would fit into their life. So I like to use that as an example of learning faster. And so the key takeaway there is, thinking about, how can we experiment in small ways, and how can we instrument for learning as we do these experiments and as we try to pursue innovation and pursue a number of different projects in a portfolio. What can we learn? How do we make sure that we're not only learning from failure but also from success to push things forward faster? And that leaves us with one question before we start going to the table discussions, and that's, what are you waiting for? Are you willing to take a leap? Are you willing to propel yourself out there and take the risk because somebody will catch you? If you build the right system, you build the right process, you build the right portfolio, then you'll manage your risk and you'll increase your ability to have success in innovation.